All right, everyone. Hello. I am Thomas, and welcome to my channel. I do educational videos, and today we were again looking at the theory of everything that is called the reciprocal system of theory. That is that was discovered by Dewey B. Larson, and over the course of most of the 20th century. He died back in 1990. We're actually looking at his final book that came out posthumously in 1995. It's called Beyond Space and Time. And this is Larson's attempt to go into metaphysics, the religious, the philosophical, the psychological, whereas most of his earlier books were on chemistry and physics and astronomy and the hard sciences. This is was a departure, and some of his adherents were even embarrassed by it and were angry at his wife for publishing it after he died because they didn't think that he would have wanted it to be published. Be that as it may, the basic idea of the reciprocal system is that it is a universe of motion. The world's not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It is made out of motion. Matter and energy are, in fact, just kinds of motion, as is just about all of the scientific phenomena out there, including gravity and magnetic flux and capacitance and electric current and electric charge and pressure and obviously acceleration, speed, force. These are all forms of motion, and they are all representable uniquely and exclusively in terms of space and time. And that's because the way that Larson defines motion is that motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are reciprocals of each other, hence the reciprocal system. Basically the same as 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. In motion, you have a time component and you have a space component. You don't get time or space without the other. They come in a package deal. Just like I was saying with the box. If you have a box, you have the inside of the box and you have the outside of the box. They come together. You don't have one without the other. And you really don't have one without all three. And so space and time are reciprocals of each other. Therefore, they have the same general qualities. What we know about space is that it's 3 or more dimensions. And so therefore, time is also 3 or more dimensions. What we know about time is that it's flowing and progressing. It's always getting later and later. And therefore, space also has that quality. It's flowing and progressing, always getting farther and farther apart. Which you could see if you took a balloon and you put a bunch of dots on the balloon with a magic marker and you blew up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other. That is an analogy of the progression of space. Larson calls that clock space to correspond with clock time. And that is what Larson calls a scalar motion. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no particular direction. You could think of it as no direction or all directions. And then the three-dimensionality or 3 or more dimensionality Larson refers to as coordinate space and then also coordinate time. Now, time and space are also similar in that they are in discrete units only. There's no continuity of space and time. They come in chunks, in units of the size of a discrete unit in space. is approximately 4.5 times 10 to the minus 8 meters. And with time, it is the incredibly small amount of 1.5 times 10 to the minus 16 seconds. That means every second that goes by, there were approximately 6.6 quadrillion units of time per second. So these discrete units are so small that there's no way we could, make them out or resolve them. They are, so that's why everything appears to be smooth. But if you really get down to the, infinitesimal level, then you will see that they are discrete and, they build one after another. There are no half units or a third of a unit or 3/10 of a unit or anything like that. Now, when you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, now you know that space over time is motion. The car is moving. Space over time is speed. I'm sorry, speed, which is a kind of motion. But space over time, just like the car is moving 10 miles per hour, 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time, that is speed. Well, 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And so in Larson's universe, the speed of light is the midpoint or the null point or even the origin of the universe, whereas in Einstein's universe, the speed of light was the maximum speed of the universe. So for Larson, there is an entire universe out there that is moving faster than the speed of light, which corresponds with this familiar universe that we have, that we recognize as moving slower than the speed of light. The slower than light speed universe he calls the material sector, or sector 1. This is the realm of chemistry and physics. And then over on the other side, the side that's faster than the speed of light, we have what Larson calls sector 2, or the cosmic sector. And these are all inverted relationships. So this would actually be the realm of inverse matter, inverse chemistry, and inverse physics. Now, in sector 1, matter grows by aggregation, bonding, till it gets to its most complex level, which is DNA. At that point, DNA becomes eligible to be controlled overall by a sector 2 entity. And that is what Larson calls the life unit. Life is a combination of material and cosmic entities. And then this life unit begins as a single-celled organism, and it evolves and develops till it gets to its most complex level, which Larson calls the intelligent human being. At that point, the intelligent human being becomes eligible to be controlled by a sector 3 entity. Now, sector 3 is what Larson refers to as the region that is beyond space and time, independent of space and time. He calls that metaphysical. And the metaphysical area is also maybe what I would think of as the speed of light, as the midpoint and the origin of this universe, of these two universes. And this metaphysical region, Larson says, is always good, it's always right, and it communicates with the intelligent human beings. But since the intelligent human beings are basically the equivalent of single-celled spiritual organisms, they haven't quite yet developed, most of them anyway, haven't quite yet developed the tools and the preparation for decoding the messages that we're getting from sector 3. And so at many times those messages are incorrect, the way that we translate them. Now that's where his final book is coming in, Beyond Space and Time. It has to do with metaphysical, um, metaphysical processes and communications. And again, Sector 3 communication is motivating us toward the good or the just or the ethical behavior, whereas Sector 2 is controlling us in terms of survival. It's motivating us toward survival or animal behavior. At times those work in harmony, at times they work in conflict, and that's where free will comes in. So now we are in chapter 24 of this book, which is called Outlook for Communication. I think this is chapter 25, Outlook for Communication. And he was just talking about telepathy, which is another Sector 3 communication that is along with things like intuition, religious revelation, ESP, scientific insight, beatific visions. And he was noting that a key aspect of telepathic communication is that in general the ones that have been authenticated have come under conditions of extreme emotional stress. And so that's where he's going to take over right here. It is possible that this predominance of highly emotional cases in the records is the result of a selection process. Experiences that seem to be well outside the limits of plausible explanation as mere coincidences are not at all uncommon. But most of these receive little attention. They are not even mentioned to anyone or even remembered for any extended period, to say nothing of being recorded in any way. Records of any kind, even recollections, are therefore confined to the most spectacular instances. The seeming preponderance of highly emotional situations is thus misleading. Nevertheless, the frequent occurrence of telepathic transmission under stress seems to rule out calm and peaceful contemplation as a prerequisite for the Sector 3 type of communication. It will be necessary, however, to examine the possibility that the transmitter and the receiver of the telepathic message are subject to different considerations. In the communication process previously discussed, intuition, scientific insight, and revelation, we have been dealing only with receivers, and our finding that quiet concentration is conducive to success in achieving communication applies specifically to reception and not necessarily to transmission. Experience with the reception of telepathic messages does not contradict this finding, as it is ordinarily the transmitter of the message who is under emotional stress, not the receiver. At this point, then, our tentative conclusion is that the circumstances that we have previously found to be favorable for the reception of communications of an intuitive nature apply to the reception of all communications from Sector 3, but that some special mental or emotional state, the nature of which is not yet clear, is a requirement for successful transmission of the message through Sector 3 channels. Now remember, when a person is under the influence of Sector 3, Larson refers to that as level 3. So you could have a Sector 3 communication between two intelligent humans. It doesn't necessarily have to come from Sector 3, because Sector 3 kind of controls the intelligent human if the intelligent human allows that to happen. And so you can have a telepathic communication between two humans, and it would still involve Sector 3. Okay, back to Larson. At first glance, the second part of this conclusion would seem to be contradicted by the fact that there is another form of Sector 3 communication which can take place under a great variety of circumstances, in which the transmitter may be anywhere from perfectly calm to highly emotional. This is the religious activity known as prayer. In secular life, a prayer is a petition or earnest request. Religious prayers extend over a considerably wider range of attitudes and subject matter, but for the purposes of the present discussion, their essential characteristic is that they are attempts to communicate with the existence or existences in the metaphysical region. This is an activity of vast proportions, carried on by hundreds of millions of people in all parts of the earth and over the entire span of recorded history. A more extended consideration of this activity indicates that there are some significant differences between prayer and the forms of non-physical communication previously examined that should be taken into account in arriving at our conclusions. One point is that while telepathy attempts to communicate with another human being and intuition receives information from Sector 3, prayer attempts to transmit a message to Sector 3. We may logically conclude then that prayer has the advantage of dealing with a vastly more sensitive receiver, which or who is capable of receiving communications from less efficient transmitters. Thus, the previous conclusion that the transmitter must be in some special mental or emotional state in order to be successful in sending his message does not have to be discarded. It merely needs to be modified to apply only to communications between human individuals. We will take a look at this later in this chapter. It should also be noted that while we know that prayers are being offered under conditions in which the supplicant's attitudes range all the way from casual to highly motivated, we have little or no evidence as to what effect, if any, these attitudes may have had on the success of the attempts to communicate. Indeed, we have very little reliable information about the results of prayer, and it may be very well that the casual and perfunctory prayers, and perhaps the ritualistic prayers, are wholly ineffective. From a scientific standpoint, this and other uncertain aspects of prayer would seem to be subjects that call for a thorough and searching examination. As expressed by Weatherhead, we have a lot of research to do into the laws which govern intercession. Back to Larson. Religious authorities have generally been opposed to anything of this kind, ostensibly on the ground that raising questions about or attempting to analyze such intimately religious matters verges on sacrilege. We may surmise, however, that this opposition is also motivated by fear that one of the major questions that would be addressed in such an investigation is whether communication of this nature is possible at all. Obviously, the ecclesiastics must maintain, with all of the positiveness at their command, dogmatically, if one wishes to use that term, that such a question cannot be entertained, even for a moment, since religious doctrine in its entirety is based on the premise that such communication does take place. This objection should not apply in the same degree to the investigation that is now being suggested in this work, inasmuch as the findings upon which the study would be based definitely confirm the existence of communication with the metaphysical region, and hence the question to which the religious authorities are the most sensitive would not come up at all. This being true, it would seem that science and religion have every reason to make this a common cause and to join forces for a thorough inquiry into the details of the process. Obviously, if anything can be discovered that leads to more effective and efficient communication by the prayer route, the primary benefit accrues to religion. If anything can be discovered that improves the process of gaining scientific insight, the primary benefit accrues to science. But the findings of this work indicate that these two processes are essentially nothing more than different manifestations of the same thing. This in turn makes it altogether likely that any significant discovery in either area will be applicable to both. Of course, such cooperation will be impossible if those on the religious side insist that all of their doctrines are infallible and not subject to question. For example, it will be necessary before any appraisal of the relative effectiveness of different procedures can be undertaken to come to some conclusion as to what kinds of petitions are admissible. It will be particularly essential to examine the question as to whether it is in order to request that one or more of the governing laws or principles of the universe be set aside in a particular circumstance. This is another sensitive point, to be sure, since most religions have utilized what they classify as miracles for the purpose of bolstering their case for their particular doctrines. And they have encouraged their adherents to ask the ruling powers for concessions, which in effect call for miracles or their equivalent. No doubt some of the ecclesiastics will be adamant in opposition to any inquiry into this situation, but it would seem that by this time a substantial segment of the religious community should be willing to participate in an exploration of this kind, particularly since the findings of the present investigation are not adverse to certain classes of miracles. Okay, we're going to leave it there. And we will take over tomorrow in the middle of this chapter 25, where he's getting into talking about prayer and miracles and how those relate to Sector 3. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Have a great day.